Hey guys, welcome to episode 13. In this episode, I'll be talking about website and blog ownership and what all of that entails. So, I'll be talking about topics such as hosting, domain names, subdomains, and really digging into that terminology and understanding what all of that means and why you need to know about it in order to have a website or a blog. As I said, we're going to be talking about what it means to own a website or a blog, what hosting means, and what domains and subdomains are. So there is a lot that goes into having a website. So it's one thing to say, oh, I want to just have a website or I just want to have a blog, but there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. First off, there's going to be annual and monthly fees, and that's going to come from either the hosting and or the domain name or the tool that you're using. There comes the website creation. Are you going to use a website builder like in the previous video we were talking about? Or are you going to hire someone to create the website for you? You also want to consider branding if you're working on creating a bigger brand for yourself. What other elements of your brand do you need to basically tie into your website? Are there color schemes that you need to use? Are there different logos you need to use? You also need to consider content development, which can actually be kind of time intensive depending on how much you enjoy writing. And then you also have to consider maintenance. Websites are just like any other piece of software. So if you're using something like WordPress has updates on a frequent basis. Are you going to be the person maintaining that, or are you going to hire someone else? Because if you don't keep up with those things, then your website becomes less secure and a little bit more vulnerable to hackers. First things first, you want to think about, why do I even want a website? Well, there's plenty of reasons why. Maybe you're bored, you just want to have a blog talking about your latest adventures in the kitchen, or maybe you want to have a website about your family history, or maybe you just want a personal website or portfolio that showcases the work that you've done. You also need to consider, besides the purpose of the website, the time you're willing to dedicate to it, the energy you're willing to dedicate to it, and the money you're willing to put forth to get it up and to keep it up. You've got to consider what your budget's going to be, and you need to take into consideration the additional cost, some of which I've mentioned before, that help you with maintaining and keeping up your website. As far as branding and marketing, you want to think about, do you plan to have a larger brand than just your website? And will you coordinate your website with other aspects of your brand as well? As far as marketing, who are you targeting with your website? Because it's one thing to have a website, but if no one's going to your website, is it really serving that much of a purpose? And how will you get your audience to your website? What makes your website stand out from other people who may be in the same field or same niche as you? So hosting is what puts your website on the internet. It basically involves securing server space for your website, and it must be paid for every year. So that's one of those additional costs you have to keep in mind. So if you're going to a website, first you're gonna basically go to the website through your web browser, whether that's Firefox, Google Chrome, or Internet Explorer. So you say, I want to go to this website. And your web browser says, basically to the web server where the website lives, hey, can I see that website, web server? And the server basically has all of the files for that website. And so when the web browser requests to see that website, the web server says, okay, yep, I have all the files for the website, here you go. And it sends those files down to your web browser, and you see the website. And so that's why hosting is so important. Hosting encompasses having that server space with those website files. Now, if a web browser says, hey, web server, I want to see this website, and the web server doesn't have that website's files, the server is going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about, so here's an error message. I don't have that website. Now, to make it a little bit more technical, this is basically what happens. So you want to go to a website. Your web browser is working on your behalf and taking that request from you. and your web browser requests to see that website from the hosting server, and then the server sends down that website and its files. Now, the way that a web server knows what type of website it needs to grab is due to the domain name of the website. So the domain name is the name of the website. For example, google.com is a domain name with a .com extension. Now, there are over 200 different types of extensions available, such as .org, .com, like I said, .net, and all kinds of different other ones. This is another cost that must be paid for on an annual basis. Going back to hosting, there are going to be 3 different types of hosting that you see when you're looking for website hosting. Shared hosting, which is the cheapest and is usually the best source or the best choice for beginners in most websites. VPS hosting, which is much more reliable than shared hosting because there are limited people sharing that server with you. And then there's also dedicated hosting, which has the best performance, is like the creme de la creme of hosting, and it's the best for huge websites, like huge corporation websites, huge business websites, and things like that. So you are more than likely going to want to have shared hosting because, like I said, it's the best choice for beginners. It's the cheapest. If you know right now that you want a website, but you're not really sure what it's going to look like in the long term, this is really great for you because you're not investing a lot of money into a particular type of hosting. There are a bunch of different hosting providers out there which provide hosting services for your website. These are just a few. These are usually the ones that tend to be the best. My personal favorite is Bluehost because I think their support is really great. They're available through chat, they're available via phone, all kinds of stuff. But HostGator, DreamHost, and InMotion Hosting are also really great too. So with these different hosting providers, they're all going to have different features as part of their plans. You just need to go to their website, check out, I would recommend checking out their shared hosting and just seeing the different plans that are available and see if those features match up with what you're looking for. So some ways to kind of help you figure out how to choose a hosting provider. Consider the customer service availability. Are they going to be available 24/7? So if your website goes down or the server that's holding your website goes down, will they be available so that you can contact them and ask them what the status of that is? Or will they be available to help you out with anything else? You also want to think about account limitations. So definitely look at the fine print and see what they actually allow with their different hosting plans. You also want to think about if they have email options available. So if you have a domain name, you can potentially get an email address that's personalized based on your domain name. So for example, hi at whatever your website's name is .com. And you may prefer that, especially if you're trying to build out your own brand, because it ties it back to your website and it's more professional than something like at gmail.com or at yahoo.com. You also want to think about multiple domains and or websites. So what if you decide you want to expand your website and you want to have more other smaller websites that also lead into your bigger website? Think about that too, because it may be a pain in the butt to switch hosting providers in the future. Other things to think about, website backups. So you can back up your website yourself if you are a little bit more technically savvy, but some hosting providers do allow you to back up your website on their own terms, so they can automatically set up backups for you. Sometimes they're included in the hosting plans, but sometimes they're also an add-on fee, so definitely look at that. As I mentioned, hosting plans are going to be different based on your hosting providers, so just look at the plans and see what works for you. And I would highly, highly recommend asking around, checking with other people about their own hosting experiences and what hosting providers they like the best. as I said, think about how often users are going to download large files, and make sure your hosting provider offers upgrade options should you need it. So going back to domain names, again, a domain name is your website's name. So it's like google.com with .com being that extension. And it's something that must also be paid for every year. So you have to pay for hosting every year, and you have to pay for your domain name every year. For domains, instead of a hosting provider, you have domain registrars, which is the company that you buy your domain name from. Now, this may be the same company as your hosting provider. For example, I do know with Bluehost you can purchase domain names through them, which I really like because I can keep all my stuff in one location relating to my website. So I have all my hosting there, and I have all my domain names there. And anytime I need to pay for something on an annual basis, I just have one location to go. But you don't have to choose a company that has hosting and domain names. You can choose completely different companies if you want to. I would just highly recommend to shop around, check the prices, and check any restrictions on those domain registrars. There's also something out there called subdomains, and a subdomain is an additional name added to the front of your domain name. So it can be used to distinguish from different areas or different aspects of your website. So an example of this would be blog.mywebsite.com. So if you have a website, say for example, familyhistory.com, so the main website of familyhistory.com has all this different content, photos, whatever, but the blog section of myfamilyhistory.com is at blog.myfamilyhistory.com. So it's just a way to organize sections of your website. It's not required for you to set it up that way. You could totally do something like familyhistory.com/blog, and that's perfectly fine too. It just kind of depends on how you want to structure the names of different areas on your website. An important thing about subdomains is, like I said, you're not required to have it, so if you don't want it, you don't have to do it. But there's usually no additional cost to add a subdomain to your website. You just have to have the domain name first, so familyhistory.com you would have to own, and then from there you would be able to add the subdomain if you want to. Now, this is just a visualization of the domain name lifecycle. So domain names are a little bit weird in how they work because sometimes they're popular domain names and people want them, and so they wait for essentially someone to not renew their domain name so they can purchase it. So you do definitely want to make sure to keep track of when you need to renew your domain name. A lot of the times with domain registrars, they do allow you to automatically renew your domain name. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely make sure to check out for that option. So with a domain name, say you want a domain name, I'll just go with familyhistory.com again. Let's say it's available, familyhistory.com is available, cool, good. You go ahead and register to buy the domain name, which is usually going to run you about between $15 and $20. And then you own the domain name at least for a 1-year period. Now, with certain domain registrars, they may allow you to own the domain name for more than a year. It just depends. And then after that time period is up, whether it's a year or more than that, you have to renew it again for another period. But let's say you don't renew your domain name. You forget, or you have the wrong card information or something like that. So what happens is you have a grace period. And before I start, this process kind of depends on your domain registrar. So you really have to read the fine print and see how they handle this process. So this is the general process for what happens. So you usually have a grace period of anywhere from 0 to 30 days to try to renew your domain name again. If you still don't renew it, it basically gets put into a redemption period for 30 days where you really can't touch it or do anything with it. Then from there, it gets put into a status called pending delete, which means that the domain a registrar is going to delete the domain name. I'm using air quotes here. Delete the domain name from whatever databases it's associated with. And so it'll be in that state for about 5 days at the very least. And then once that is over, the domain name will become available again, and it's available to everyone. So you have to really get on it if you want to buy it, or someone else may snatch it up. I've definitely had it happen to me a couple of times where I owned a domain name and then I decided I don't really feel like paying for it anymore, and then a couple of years later I decide, hey, I actually want that domain name back. But someone else had it, so I had to wait for this whole process to go through before I could actually get access to that domain name. It's really helpful to know this process too, because if there's a particular domain name that you want, but it's unavailable, you're going to have to wait this period of time and hope that whoever currently owns the domain name will not renew it. Now, I do think that there are ways where you can actually either wait for a domain auction, which happens online sometimes, or reach out to the individual who owns that domain name and attempt to purchase it from them. But I would highly recommend trying to find a domain name that works for you so you don't have to worry about that process, which can get kind of complicated. And that's all I've got. If you guys liked what you saw, definitely make sure to subscribe, let other folks know, give me a like, and give me some comments to let me know what you guys think of the series so far. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I'll give you a hand. Thank you so much.